Okay, so looking at the cosine graph, we're still going to adjust the period the same way that we did before. So just like the sine graph, the period of the cosine graph is normally 2 pi. And it's going to be multiplied by this horizontal compression of 1/3 because of this 3 right here. So our period's going to be 2 pi over 3. And that's going to be the 4th mark on our graph. If we divide that by 4, we get pi over 6, meaning each mark is pi over 6. Labeling, okay? So stop and pause if you have to and do the fraction math on your paper to make sure you understand that. Otherwise, you need to ask next class period so that we can clarify this for you. Sorry, you guys, the battery is not working correctly. Okay. So with the cosine graph, the main difference is that the parent function, when you cycle through the values, starts at a maximum, but it cycles through the same values as the sine function. So this is one period of the cosine function, adjusted the period by changing the numbering on the x-axis because of that 3. Now we're going to go ahead and shift everything to the left, pi over 6, because of this movement. And pi over 6 on our graph is 1 unit. So I'm going to move each point to the left 1 unit. So you can see that here in orange. Okay. And then finally, I have this negative 1/2. So that's a vertical reflection as well as a vertical compression. So reflections and compressions vertically are not going to affect these points on the midline because they're on the thing we would reflect over and the thing that we're measuring our stretch or compression from. However, points like this that were a maximum, because of the reflection, they will now be a minimum. And rather than being 1 unit away, they will only be half a unit away because of the 1/2 compression. And this point that was a minimum will now be a maximum, but only at half a unit away. And again, this point that was a maximum will now be a minimum, but only at half a unit away. So, oops, we get something like this. And again, we can continue those points to get more periods of the function. So our period was 2 pi over 3. Our amplitude in this case is 1/2. Our domain is all real numbers. And our range is from negative 1/2 to positive 1/2. Okay. So we have one more to help you guys if you're struggling with this. So the last one we're going to look at with sine and cosine is another cosine graph. Okay. So again here, this is like having a 1/3, which really means a horizontal stretch by a factor of 3, telling me that my period is actually going to be 6 pi. So to cycle through the normal pattern of points is going to take all the way until 6 pi. If I divide that by 4, I get 3 pi over 2. Okay? And then if I use that to label my axis, I end up with labels like this. Okay? Again, if you're struggling with the dividing by 4 or counting by that fraction, bring that to class with you next time so we can do that appropriately. Now, again, the cosine parent function starts at a maximum and then cycles through these values. Okay? So this is the parent function of the cosine adjusted to the period of 6 pi because of the 1/3. Now, I have a horizontal reflection because of this negative here, which is like flipping things from left to right, so over the y-axis, which means this point will stay. This point gets reflected over here. This one gets reflected over here. This one reflected over here. And finally, the last point reflected over here. You actually can't tell the difference from the parent function to the reflection. I mean, you can up here because I wrote it in orange, but notice it's just a continuation of the cosine wave. The way that the cosine is built, you can't really see if somebody did that horizontal reflection. We're then going to shift down to So my middle points, okay, are going to be along this line. And then notice that the amplitude is 3. So these points that were on the midline are still going to be the middle of my function, but they're going to be down 2 units at -2. This point that was a minimum is still going to be a minimum, but now it needs to be 3 units away from the midline. So this isn't really part of the graph, but just to give you the visual, if this is the new midline, for that point to be 3 units below is going to be down here at -5. And then this point that was a maximum needs to be 3 units above the midline, which actually it will be at 1. And the same thing with this maximum here. So the final version of my graph is this. And again, I can continue this sequence of points by going through these things here. Okay. So our period was 6 pi. Our amplitude is 3. Our domain is all real numbers. And our range is from -5 to 1. Okay? So these are extra examples to help you graph based on what we did in class. And so then what we'll be working on is the homework that goes with this and asks you to graph sine and cosine functions specifically.